Well, Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland is set to table the federal government's fall economic statement tomorrow. That statement will reveal whether Freeland is keeping her promise to hold the federal deficit for this year to $40.1 billion or less. The parliamentary budget officer has already said she's unlikely to hit that mark. The revised look at the books also comes amid questions over the potential economic impact of Donald Trump's looming tariff threat.
I think to the extent that she can, the finance minister is going to focus on a bigger economic picture and the tools or strategies that are being used to try to prevent some of the economic headwinds that we're heading into.
And for more on all of this, we are joined live now by CTV News political commentator Tom Mulcair. Mr. Mulcair, good to see you. Thanks for taking the time.
Good to be with you, Lindsay.
So much to go over, as always. I want to start with the fall economic statement or update expected tomorrow, late tomorrow afternoon, late in the year as well. Do you think there's already some speculation that the government might not be able to keep that promise of a lower debt to GDP ratio? What do you think we're going to see?
Well, that's an interesting point, and let's start with that, because that is where I believe that the government of Trudeau and Freeland are going to try to hang their hat. They're going to try to say, well, if you look at the overall debt compared to the size of our economy, we're not doing so bad. But what Canadians are going to be looking at, because I don't think that the average voter spends a lot of time worrying about the debt to gross domestic product ratio, they look at the $40 billion promise. They said they would not have debt this year over $40 billion. And that deficit will be blown through, it looks like, from all indications. There's going to be an all-day lockup on Monday so that people can go over the numbers. And I do think that there are going to be some people challenging some of the numbers that are being put forward by the Trudeau Liberals right now. We're getting into electoral mode. They're going to start trying to jazz up the numbers a little bit. They're going to try to get people to concentrate on Donald Trump and say we're spending a little bit more because of everything that's happening at the border. But at the end of the day, Canadians are having to tighten their own belts, and they're looking at a government whose spending is completely out of control. An 8-week small tax holiday on a few products, and then $250 checks to people earning up to $150,000 a year for $6.8 billion, and we're not supposed to really notice that. This is what's been going on with Trudeau. He's overspent constantly. He's going to try to say most of it was the pandemic. But, Lindsay, he had already blown through the $100 billion of new debt by the time the pandemic came along. So he can't keep saying that it's the fault of the pandemic. He can't keep saying it's everybody else's fault. At some point, he's got to realize that he's never been able to stick to a budgetary plan. That's why people like Bill Morneau are out there giving him advice these days. But Morneau was fired by Trudeau because he was the type of person who actually knew what he was doing, and Trudeau just wanted to make everything political. By the way, the tax break and those other things that he had announced as goodies, those weren't prepared by the people in finance. And Chrystia Freeland and the people around her made sure that everybody knew that this week. And that got her into a bit of trouble with Trudeau, who was pushing back. But they want people to know that they are competent public administrators. They know what they're doing. But it's the people who handle Trudeau's communications that push this stuff out, even though it made no economic or public policy sense.
Yeah, it's been interesting to see that. And obviously, as you mentioned, with all this coming, it's a lot of political ammo probably for some of the opposition parties. Yeah. There's also been a lot of speculation. You talk about, Chrystia Freeland saying one thing, Justin Trudeau saying another. A lot of speculation. There are some reports that there could be a cabinet shuffle soon and that Chrystia Freeland might be out in terms of being finance minister within this cabinet shuffle. I've heard some rumors this could even happen before Christmas. What are you hearing? What do you think is going to happen? Could we see that sooner than later?
I'm hearing the same thing as you, Lindsay, and I do think that Trudeau would probably go as soon as Wednesday, which is the last sitting day. So if you're going to have that sort of bombshell announcement, you're not going to give anybody a chance to go at you during question period about it. And I do think that we're probably going to see a couple of things. First of all, if they do manage to convince Mark Carney to come in, that will be a huge coup for Trudeau. And he's so respected, former governor of the Bank of Canada, former governor of the Bank of England. He would automatically give Trudeau back the type of credibility he lost the day he fired Bill Morneau. Chrystia Freeland is extraordinarily capable. She could go easily back to foreign affairs, where she did a very good job before. She would be part of the overall team handling Trump, and she did very well when they renegotiated the NAFTA. So that's going to be something to keep an eye on. Who would get bumped there? That would be Melanie Joly. And I don't expect her to get anything huge as a portfolio. She's in a spot of trouble right now with Trudeau as well. Maybe the transportation portfolio that was left by Pablo Rodriguez when he left. But don't forget, Trudeau is missing 6 ministers at this stage. So he absolutely needs to tool up and present something of a fresh face if indeed he sticks around for the next campaign. I still have my doubts about that because I think he knows how to read a poll. And all of the polls across the country are showing him more than 20 points behind Pierre Poilievre's Conservatives.
Okay, before we move on then, if he is watching those polls and maybe not sticking around for the next campaign, as you might suspect, obviously Mark Carney's name has been floated many times before as maybe being the next leader of the federal Liberal Party. If he were, and I know it's all speculation, rumor, to become the finance minister, does that maybe not put him too close to Justin Trudeau and maybe not a good candidate for the Liberal Party? Do you think that's out? What do you think's going on there?
Anyone who has sat around the cabinet table, Lindsay, during all of these bad decisions by Trudeau and his team, they're going to have to wear those bad decisions. They were there. They were at the cabinet table. Whereas Carney at least gets to come in as a fresh face with deep experience, and he'd be able to say, look, I tried to clean things up in a few months, but that wasn't possible. Give me a mandate. One other very interesting thing happened last week. Trudeau, you might recall, at the beginning of the week, gave a speech about women in politics, progressives in politics. It was the speech that got him into so much trouble with the premiers because he openly mused about how much things would have been better south of the border if Kamala Harris had won. And that was a bizarre thing to say when he's telling everybody to tone down and be on the same page. But what he was perhaps doing there was teeing things up for his open support for a woman to be his replacement. He's got some outstanding choices. People like Anita Anand, like Chrystia Freeland. I'm sure Melanie Joly would certainly like to be in there. And of course, Christy Clark, the former Premier of British Columbia, has, through spokespersons made it quite clear that she'd be interested in taking a run. So Carney would be an outstanding candidate. But the Liberals are the only party. Lindsay, there are 5 parties in the House of Commons. The only one that's never had a woman leader is the Liberal Party of Canada. In fact, Trudeau defeated 4 quality women candidates to become, the next in that unbroken line of male leaders of the Liberal Party of Canada. So, a guy who always describes himself as a feminist, maybe he's going to try to make up for some of that by trying to put his considerable heft behind an eventual candidacy by a woman to lead the Liberal Party. Stay tuned. I think that might be part of the mix.
Stay tuned for sure. Okay, before we wrap things up, I want to talk about, you briefly mentioned it there, kind of that response to the tariff threats by President-elect Donald Trump. Obviously, we've been hearing a lot from most of the premiers, haven't been hearing as much in terms of a plan from the federal government. But how do you think things are going on that front with both the federal government and the premiers? Do you think maybe some tactics will change? Do you think things are going well? What do you think?
I think Trudeau is right to preach that everybody has to be on the same page, but then he's got to do the same. He can't give speeches where he said it would have been better with Kamala Harris. I mean, how do you square that with the irascible Donald Trump? So that's something that he's going to have to get hold of. Bizarrely, one of his key ministers, Mark Miller, on Friday decided to use a bit of name calling to describe the premiers who were trying to do things on their own, presumably Legault and Doug Ford first among them, calling them people in a hockey game who were hogging the puck. The French term was very colloquial, and it was absolutely bizarre coming from a senior minister. So I think that they're going to have to simply get set, calm down, come up with a plan, which they still haven't elaborated so much so far, and they've got to realize that they're dealing with a real threat from an unpredictable source, which is Donald Trump. And people like Bill Morneau, who are giving good advice, have to be brought in. They have to be part of the team. But Trudeau, of course, whenever he gets on the wrong side of somebody, they tend to disappear. It's too bad because Morneau's been giving him good advice. It depends whether or not Trudeau actually wants to listen to it.
Okay, so much to watch for. And if you're right, and there is a cabinet shuffle as soon as Wednesday, maybe we'll have you back then to talk about it. That's CTV
Perfect.
News.
Looking forward to it.
Yeah, political commentator Tom Mulcair joining us. Thanks so much for your time.
All the best, Lindsay.